A little girl runs to the police, her face streaked with tears, pleading, "Please follow me home. What they discover inside her house will leave you speechless. A broken family, a lost life, and a chilling secret hidden within the walls." But there's a twist. What happens next will make you question everything. Will the police be able to save her? And will justice be served? Stay with us until the end to uncover the truth that no one expected. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the quiet town. The streets, usually bustling with the sounds of families and street vendors, were eerily still. Then a small figure appeared, running with desperation in her eyes. Her clothes were torn, her face streaked with tears. A little girl, no more than 7, ran straight toward the police officers standing by their patrol car. She stumbled, her breath coming in short gasps. "Please follow me home," she cried, her voice trembling with fear. The officers exchanged confused glances, unsure of what to make of her. What's wrong?" one officer asked, kneeling down to her level. The girl wiped her face with the back of her hand, nodding urgently. There. "Please," she cried, gripping his sleeve with tiny hands. Her eyes darted around as though expecting someone to appear behind her. The officers, unsure but sensing the panic in her voice, agreed to follow. They drove through narrow streets, the tension mounting with each passing minute. The little girl didn't speak another word, only pointed ahead. Her small finger trembled as it directed them to an old, abandoned house on the edge of town. The car stopped, the tires crunching on the gravel driveway. The girl jumped out of the car, her bare feet slapping against the pavement. "Stay close," one of the officers called, but the girl didn't listen. She ran straight up to the front door, which creaked open as if waiting for her. The officers hesitated for a moment, then followed cautiously. Inside, the house was dark, the air thick with dust and neglect. Cobwebs hung from the corners, and the smell of old wood and mold filled their noses. The girl led them through the rooms, her steps echoing in the silence. They arrived at a bedroom, the door slightly ajar. The little girl pushed it open, revealing something that made the officers freeze in their tracks. There, lying motionless on the floor, was a woman. Her face pale, her body lifeless. The girl's mother. The officers rushed forward, checking for signs of life, but it was too late. Her final breath had been taken hours earlier. The little girl knelt beside her, tears streaming down her face. I tried to wake her," she sobbed. "I tried." The officers were stunned, unable to process what had just unfolded. What had started as a simple request for help had turned into something far darker. As the ambulance arrived, one of the officers turned to the girl. "Did anyone hurt you?" he asked gently. The girl shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. "No, they left us." The room was silent, except for the sound of distant sirens. And in that silence, the officers understood. The little girl had led them here not out of fear for herself, but for the memory of her mother. The ambulance crew arrived swiftly, their faces tense as they moved to assess the situation. The little girl remained beside her mother, her tiny hands pressed to her chest. A paramedic knelt down beside her, speaking gently. "Sweetheart, we need to go with them now. You'll be safe." The girl didn't respond. She stared blankly at the lifeless body, her lips quivering slightly. One of the officers, his heart heavy with compassion, knelt beside her. "We'll take care of you. You're not alone," he said, his voice soft but firm. The girl finally turned to him, her eyes wide, filled with sorrow beyond her years. "Is she gone?" she asked in a voice so small, it almost broke the officer's heart. The officer hesitated, his throat tightening. "Yes, sweetheart. She's gone," he said quietly, his voice cracking. The girl nodded slowly as though she already knew. There was a brief moment of silence before she spoke again, her voice barely audible. "She always told me I was strong. That I had to be strong for both of us." Her words hit the officer like a blow. He could see the weight she carried, the burden of a child forced to grow up too quickly. Do you know what happened?" the officer asked, his tone gentle but probing. The girl's gaze shifted toward the corner of the room, where a broken picture frame lay scattered on the floor. "I don't know, I don't remember, but there were men," she whispered, her eyes distant. The officer exchanged a glance with his partner, who gave him a knowing look. They would have to investigate further, but for now their focus was on the little girl. Her world had just been shattered in the most unimaginable way. "Sweetheart, you're safe now," the officer said again, placing a hand on her shoulder. But the girl pulled away as if the touch was too much for her to bear. "I have to stay here," she said softly, staring at the floor. The officers exchanged a glance, their hearts heavy. They understood. She wasn't ready to leave her mother. As the ambulance team moved the body, the girl remained in the same spot, her eyes vacant, her face pale. The officer stood back, giving her the space she needed, their hearts breaking for the pain she had endured. It was clear she had known more than a child should have to bear. She had lived in a world where fear had taken hold of her home, where love had been overshadowed by darkness. And yet, she had summoned the strength to ask for help. To ask someone to follow her home. The police officers stayed with her until family members arrived, gently guiding her to the car. As they drove away, the silence in the vehicle was profound. The little girl had witnessed horrors that no child should ever see. But in that moment, as the sun dipped below the horizon, there was a small flicker of hope that she would not have to face the darkness alone anymore. As the car moved through the empty streets, one officer couldn't help but wonder how many others there were hidden, suffering in silence. He couldn't change the past, but maybe, just maybe, he could help change the future. For the little girl who had shown them all what true strength looked like. As the car rolled through the quiet streets, the city's usual noise felt miles away. Inside, the little girl remained silent, staring out of the window, her tiny fingers gripping the edge of the seat. The officer beside her glanced at her every now and then, but didn't press her to speak. She had said enough already. Her silence spoke volumes, of a life turned upside down, of trust that had been broken, of a world that no longer made sense. The officer, a father himself, couldn't help but think of his own children, safe and sound at home. What would it feel like to lose that? To lose everything in one brutal, unforgiving moment? The little girl's face remained expressionless, her thoughts a mystery. He wanted to tell her that everything would be okay, that the nightmares were over. But he knew it wasn't that simple. Nothing could erase what she had just been through. The car came to a stop in front of a small, modest building, one of the only shelters in the area for children in need. The officers got out, and the little girl followed, her feet dragging as though the weight of the world was on her shoulders. As they entered the shelter, they were greeted by a kind-faced woman, someone who had seen too many broken souls pass through her doors. The officers exchanged a brief look, then turned to the girl. "This is Miss Claire," one of them said. "She'll take care of you now. You're safe here." But the girl didn't react, her gaze distant. Miss Claire bent down, speaking gently. "Hi, sweetheart. We're going to take good care of you." The little girl nodded, but didn't speak. Her gaze remained fixed on the floor, as if all the light had gone out of her eyes. "I'll be here, okay?" the officer added softly. "You're not alone anymore." The girl barely acknowledged him, but he saw the flicker of recognition in her eyes. She nodded again, slowly, before following Miss Claire into the shelter. As the door closed behind her, the officers stood in the hallway, feeling the weight of the moment. This wasn't just another case to them, it was a life. A life shattered, but with a chance to heal. They knew the road ahead would be long for the little girl. But at least now she would have the chance to rebuild. The officer exhaled deeply, his eyes lingering on the door as he turned to leave. The world was full of darkness, but in this small moment he had witnessed something beautiful. A spark of courage in the face of unimaginable loss. That courage, that small act of bravery, would not be forgotten. It would stay with him, reminding him that even in the darkest of times, there was still a glimmer of light. A child's voice, trembling with fear, had led them here. And maybe, just maybe, it was enough to change the world. The days that followed were filled with paperwork, investigation, and countless conversations. But amidst the rush of tasks, the little girl's face lingered in the officer's mind. He couldn't stop thinking about the courage it took for her to run to them. The child had faced more pain than most adults ever would, and yet, in her desperation, she had found the strength to act. She had been a beacon in the dark, guiding them to a home of nightmares, yet her heart still held onto a glimmer of hope. The police launched an investigation into the events surrounding her mother's death. They dug into the records of the house, its owners, and anyone who might have known the family. It didn't take long for the truth to emerge. The little girl's mother had been a victim of domestic violence. A history of bruises and broken promises. The man who had once claimed to love her had turned violent, a rage that consumed everything in its path. But what had been most shocking was the realization that the little girl had known this for a long time. She had seen the signs. She had heard the arguments. But despite everything, she tried to protect her mother. She tried to be the strength her mother had always told her she was. The police worked tirelessly, but the investigation wasn't easy. The man who had been behind the violence was nowhere to be found, having vanished into thin air the moment he had realized what had happened. But the officers didn't give up. They knew they had a responsibility to the little girl, to make sure that no one would ever hurt her again. Weeks passed, and slowly the shelter became a place where the girl could start to heal. Her nights were filled with quiet sleep, and her days were filled with art and play, activities that helped her begin to regain the innocence that had been stolen from her. Miss Clare, along with a team of counselors, helped her open up, piece by piece. One afternoon, as the little girl sat coloring a picture of a flower, Miss Clare sat beside her. "What are you drawing?" she asked gently. The girl glanced up, her face still full of quiet sorrow, but there was something else there now, a flicker of joy, a small sliver of light. "A flower," she said quietly. "My mother's favorite." Miss Clare smiled softly, her heart heavy with understanding. "I'm sure she would have loved it," she replied, her voice full of warmth. The girl nodded, then added a few more strokes of color to the drawing. The flower blossomed on the page, vibrant and full of life. In that moment, the little girl seemed to find a moment of peace. She wasn't just drawing a picture. She was beginning to rebuild herself. Each day she grew stronger. The officers checked in on her often, bringing small gifts, a teddy bear, a new book, a drawing kit. They made sure she knew that the world was still full of good, kind people who cared about her. And though the pain of losing her mother would never fade completely, the girl began to understand that there was still hope, still a future for her to reach for. The police would not stop searching for the man who had taken her mother away from her. But for now the little girl had a safe place to heal. A place where the sound of crying no longer echoed through the rooms. A place where laughter began to fill the air again. And as the weeks turned into months, the officer who had first come to her aid couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. Not just for the strength of the little girl, but for the quiet resilience of the human spirit. No matter how dark life became, there was always a chance for a new beginning. In the end, that was the greatest lesson of all. And as he watched the little girl grow slowly but surely back into a child again, he realized something profound. Sometimes, it's the smallest voices, those trembling with fear and pain, that carry the greatest power to change the world. Months passed, and with each passing day, the little girl's transformation became more evident. She smiled more often now, her eyes less haunted by the ghosts of her past. She spent her days at the shelter, coloring, playing with other children, and even helping the staff with small chores. Miss Clare noticed how the little girl was beginning to open up, how her confidence was slowly returning. But there were still moments of silence, moments when her eyes would drift into a distant place, as though she was searching for something lost. One afternoon, as the sun streamed through the windows of the shelter, the officer who had first responded to her cry for help visited again. He had been keeping up with the investigation and wanted to check on how she was doing. The little girl saw him from the window, standing by the door, and immediately ran toward him. "Officer," she called out, her voice filled with excitement. He knelt down to her level, a smile breaking across his face. "Hey there, kiddo," he said, his voice warm. "How are you doing?" "I'm better now," she replied, her voice a little stronger, a little more certain. "Good," he said, ruffling her hair. "You're very strong, you know that?" The girl looked up at him, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. "Thank you for coming with me that night," she said, her voice quiet but sincere. The officer's heart swelled with pride. "You don't have to thank me," he said, his eyes soft. "You were the one who found the strength. You're the hero here." The girl's face lit up at the word, hero. She wasn't just the scared little girl who had cried out for help anymore. She was strong. She was brave. She was someone who had faced unimaginable pain, and yet, here she was, standing tall. The officer's heart swelled with a mix of pride and sorrow. "Do you ever think about what happened?" he asked gently, knowing it was a question that would be difficult to answer. The girl hesitated for a moment before nodding slowly. "I think about my mom and how she always told me to be strong," she said, her voice small but steady. "And I think about how I couldn't save her." The officer's chest tightened. "You didn't fail her," he said softly. "You did the best you could. And now you have the chance to make sure you're safe. To live a life that she wanted for you." The little girl looked down at her hands, the words heavy in the air between them. "I just wish she could have seen me like this," she said softly, her voice trembling just slightly. The officer knelt beside her, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "She saw you. She saw everything. And I'm sure she's proud of you, even if she's not here." The little girl nodded, wiping away a tear that had slipped down her cheek. "Do you think she's in a better place?" she asked, her voice filled with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. The officer took a deep breath, his heart aching for her. "I believe she is," he said, his voice filled with quiet conviction. "And I believe she'll always be with you in here." He gently placed his hand over her chest. The girl looked up at him, her eyes wide as if processing the weight of his words. "Thank you," she whispered again, this time with a calmness that reflected how much she had grown. "You don't need to thank me, kiddo," the officer said with a warm smile. "But I'm proud of you. You've come so far." She nodded, a quiet sense of peace settling over her. For the first time in months she wasn't just surviving. She was beginning to live again. And as the officer left, he couldn't help but feel a sense of hope. The world could be cruel, unforgiving, but moments like these, moments of resilience, of strength, reminded him that there was always light, even in the darkest of times. The little girl was a reminder of that. And maybe, just maybe, her courage would inspire others to find their own light too. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the officer turned back one last time before he left the shelter. In the window he saw the little girl holding her drawing of a flower. It wasn't just a flower anymore. It was a symbol of new beginnings, of hope, of everything that could still be. And in that moment, he knew that the little girl, with her small but mighty heart, would continue to blossom. The weeks continued to pass, and with each new day the little girl's strength grew. Though her heart still carried the weight of the loss, she had begun to find new joy in the world around her. The shelter became a place of healing, not just for her but for others as well. She found solace in the quiet moments, reading a book, drawing another flower, or simply sitting by the window watching the world go by. One morning, as the sun peeked over the horizon, she sat at her favorite spot by the window, her fingers tracing the edges of the flower drawing she had once made for her mother. It was no longer just a reminder of the past, it had become a symbol of her resilience, her ability to survive and thrive, no matter the storm she had weathered. The officer visited regularly, always checking in on her progress, always offering encouragement. But it was no longer just about the pain of the past. It was about the future, the new life that awaited her. And one day, when the flowers bloomed in the shelter's garden, the officer arrived with some good news. "We found him," he said, his voice calm but determined. The little girl looked up from her drawing, her heart racing in her chest. "Is he gone?" she asked, her voice steady, but her eyes filled with uncertainty. "No," the officer replied. "He's been arrested. He won't hurt anyone again." For the first time in months, the girl felt a sense of relief wash over her, as though a heavy burden had been lifted from her chest. She didn't need to worry anymore. She was safe. The past would always be a part of her story, but it no longer defined who she was. She had learned to survive, to thrive, and most importantly to forgive, not for others but for herself. Her life was hers to reclaim, and she would. That afternoon, as the shelter prepared for the new season of children's activities, the little girl was handed a small plant, an actual flower, blooming with vibrant colors. "This one's for you," Miss Claire said, offering her the pot with a warm smile. The girl held the flower gently in her hands, feeling its delicate petals against her fingertips. "I'll take care of it," she said, her voice soft but full of determination. As she placed the flower in the window, a final gust of wind brushed through the room. Outside, the world seemed brighter, the air fresher, as though everything had aligned in that single moment. The little girl looked at the flower, her heart swelling with a quiet joy. For the first time she didn't feel alone. She didn't feel broken. She was whole. And as the sun set that evening, casting long shadows over the peaceful shelter, she realized that while her mother's love would always stay with her, the life she had ahead was one she would live fully, with courage and strength, just as her mother had always hoped. The story of the little girl, the one who had led the police to her broken home, would be remembered, not for the darkness she had endured, but for the light she had chosen to bring into the world. And in that choice she had found a new beginning. The story ended, but in her heart, a new chapter was just beginning.